So apparently we've been wrong about crit chance for over a year now. Let's talk about that. So yeah, this is a really interesting change that we've seen in the 7th generation. It appears that the critical hit chances are 1 in 24, 1 in 8, 1 in 2, and then 100% based on stage, and then with affection, it effectively gets cut in half. So we've been wrong, and that's like one of the weird things. Like, have you guys noticed this? Because I feel like it felt like slightly less chance of a crit, and that's really all that this is. We're talking about a couple of percentage less chance of a crit. It's not like a massive change at all, but at the same time, you know, I feel like I'm very unlucky. I feel like I'm getting crit just as much and losing the game because of it, and then I'm getting like less crits on my opponent when I feel like they need to matter. But overall, this is a buff to tanky battling, because the one way, like the most reliable way of shutting down a tank that's doing like defensive setup is that crit. So that's actually a nice way of slowing down the game pace instead of just like these wild crits all over the place. And that's actually the 2nd consecutive generation that we have seen a nerf to crit, which is a really wild thing to think about. And then that goes into like all the other balance changes, because this actually more or less confirms that Game Freak is hard nerfing RNG as much as possible to try to move Pokemon along competitively, even though they aren't doing anything about the hacking, so they're not really making much ground when it comes to that. But let's go a little deeper into this. So we also have Caphotix coming in. He's been on a lot of the data mine and information and stuff like that, so he can confirm and then shows how it's used with a little bit of code right there. And then at the bottom we can see, you know, the crit chance table, 24, 8, 2, and 1, and then divide by 2 with the affection, just kind of showing all of the other numbers and stuff like that. So what does that mean percentage-wise? Well, went on to Bulbapedia, and hey, look at that. Bulbapedia already has the information down right there, because it's a big change. It's spread out pretty quickly. This also reminds me of what happened with the Pokemon gender ratios, that they were wrong for over 10 years. And Pokemon Sun and Moon, with all the digging and the data mining, there was like a little error. So yeah, 2 bugs in the code make the fractions not precise. So it's actually an 11.9% chance female, not 12.5% chance, and all the other numbers kind of got skewed from there. So it was really strange to see this gender difference that was chilling in Pokemon, like in Pokemon all these years, but it was fixed in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. So bring attention to it, ended up getting it fixed. But then critical hit, it just got changed in 7th generation, no one noticed. So it looks like the odds of a critical hit were cut by a third. So yeah, instead of 1 in 16, it's 1 in 24. So a 4% chance instead of slightly over a 6% chance to land a crit. I mean, at that point, it feels like crits are even more RNG based. That means, like, whenever you lose to a crit now, and all the crits that you've lost to in the 7th generation, it's just more BS than ever. It's like, wait a second, that really shouldn't have happened. And also, it's like one of those things, well, now the opponent can just get luckier and land better crits, and then you're not getting any crits because it's just harder to get a crit or something. I don't know. That's a little interesting right there. But what this also did was buff crit boosting, and with the introduction of Z moves, there's also a lot of changes that actually give you like +2. So if you use a Z move that boosts your critical hit chance, there's also a couple of moves that help stack that up. You're actually getting much better crit odds than you would have like in the 6th generation with any kind of boosting or something like that. So a buff to boosting, super luck, crit items and stuff like that, because now you're gaining more, but a nerf to crit overall in the 6th generation. We saw this buff nerf to crit as well. So that was a really weird change that we saw in the 6th generation, that at one stage, no change. So if you just slap an item on a Pokemon, whatever, if you're just using a crit boosting move, whatever, it actually makes a lot of sense, because crit boosting moves, those are free. You can still run choice items, you can still run your life orb, you can still do whatever you want with those crit items, or with the crit moves, but stacking an item on that, stacking ability, or going for any kind of boosting, that's going to give you a 1 in 2 chance, which is a very powerful damage boost. But if you can make it to +3, which is very realistic by just kind of like combining all of the crit boosting together or going for a Z move, then that means you're at a 100% chance to crit. And we saw this like focus energy baton pass into a Kingdra with a crit boosting item next to Sniper, and now Draco Meteor, you don't notice that special attack drop, and then you're just stacking non-stop crits. So it's pretty crazy stuff, and that brought like a lot of changes in the 6th generation. But overall, it was a nerf, because crits now do less damage on those defensive stacking targets. And Generation 7, it's less of a chance to do less damage than what we're used to in the 5th generation. So we've been watching these nerfs for generations and years of Pokemon now. So that's pretty much me talking about the overall crit, what's happening with crit. Doesn't really change too much, except it makes tanks just a little bit less unlucky. That's kind of the best way of putting it. But I do want to compare this to the other changes that we've seen in the recent generations of Pokemon, because it really feels like Game Freak is making a push to remove RNG, and I hate that. Because one of the things that made Pokemon fun is playing the game, playing the system. If you can find those cheese strats and win the game with it, that's a viable strategy. Evasion, confusion, paralysis, flinch, all these things are viable strategies in Pokemon, but it seems like Game Freak is removing them for some reason, and it's not affecting the competitive scene at all. That, okay, like what benefits from this change competitively by removing RNG? Not much. And even then, Pokemon will always be a silly RNG game because people are still farming Scald for that 1 in 3 chance to burn. That's an insane amount of chance to burn. We still have ridiculous status conditions like freeze and sleep. Sleep has so much of an accuracy gate because it's incredibly powerful, and sleep has been nerfed non-stop. Same with like freeze, you know, it's almost impossible to find a freeze. There's nothing that guarantees a freeze, and because of that, it has a very broken side effect. So I mean, Ice Beam freezes you, that was 10%, and they don't unfreeze for like 3 turns. Well, that's just RNG. Will-O-Wisp has its accuracy, so I mean, you just get 15% unlucky, and now you get rolled by a physical attack. So I don't really understand the changes that we're seeing from Game Freak, because it doesn't change the competitive environment at all. People are still going to run Scarf Landorus, and then have a 30% chance to hit, like, to flinch both opponents, and then get double flinch on turn 1 anyways, and then win the game, and then win VGC or something. So, like, that's why I don't understand. You either have to remove all of the RNG, or you just keep Pokemon a fun, silly RNG game. And I liked it more when it was a fun, silly RNG game, because, like, I have this, instead of a reverse power creep philosophy, I have a rocket tag philosophy. I like it when everything is broken, and not just a few things are broken because everything else is getting nerfed around it for being too strong or anything like that. So yeah, Thunderwave, like, that was actually one of the weirder changes. Generation 7 just destroyed Thunderwave. Thunderwave's accuracy lowered to 90%, but also making it to where the paralysis debuff is not 75%, it's only 50%. So that means make it to where paralyzed Pokemon, they're faster, and they also have a hard chance to get paralyzed by the Thunderwave, technically buffing Glare, but I mean, like, that was a little unnecessary. And then, like, yeah, there's still a 1 in 4 chance that you could just be fully paralyzed, and that'll suck for you. Prankster getting nerfed. Prankster also being one of those things that's like, yeah, this is a very cheese mechanic. Whenever you start just, like, hounding people with status moves, things get pretty sketchy pretty quick. But overall, it's like, yeah, we got a nerf to Prankster. It's like, okay, so that means with the Thunderwave nerf, Prankster has less reliable Thunderwave, while also not working against Dark-type Pokemon, and then that's just kind of a problem. So you just can't really win out with these strategies anymore. And also going into like the Confusion nerf. So Confusion received a nerf in the 7th generation. Instead of a 1 in 2 chance to hit yourself, it's 1 in 3 chance. It buffed some things like Outrage. So if you end up with like self-induced confusion, that's a buff. It nerfs Swagger because now, actually Swagger also receiving the accuracy nerf in the 6th generation, I believe. So Swagger receiving a nerf as well, because now the opponent, you're statting them up and they have a less chance of hitting you back, and then Swagger is something that's used by Prankster Pokemon or Confusion. So there's just nerfs across the board to all of this silly stuff. Sleep. Don't get me started about sleep, guys. Like, this is why I feel that Smogon is a very negative influence on community. That their changes don't benefit Pokemon at all. We're seeing this. We're not seeing a more balanced game. We're not seeing any good coming from, like, the Smogon tiers and all their rules and stuff. But Pokemon, they seem to be reacting to the community because, you know, the Smogon community, even though they seem to have shrunken in the last couple years because people realize they're ridiculous, they've been very vocal. So we've seen nerfs to sleep. We've seen nerfs to all this RNG stuff. But I mean, we still have Landorus with the Rock Slide, and we still have Scald and all these other stupid things that make the game RNG based. And you can, like, it's just as likely that you lose to something hacksy and dumb as it is now than ever. So I mean, I don't understand what these changes are doing. But sleep, I think, is one of the best ways of looking at it, because Smogon, for some reason, has not removed their sleep clause, even though sleep has been nerfed almost like every generation. So look at this. Generation 3, nerf 2 to 5 turns. Generation 5, so like Generation 5 was when Smogon and all this like hate for RNG and stuff was blowing up, and people were showing a lot of negativity towards like sleep and stuff. Sleep now lasts 1 to 3 turns. That is an insane nerf. It almost makes sleep unviable, because like, okay, you get like 1 turn to do something, they might RNG wake up and then bash your skull in, and also it depends on the Pokemon using it. A Spore Pokemon isn't going to be able to utilize it as much because it's a slower Pokemon, but if you get a Pokemon like Gengar, Gengar is going to trash you if it lands that 60% chance for the Hypnosis, and then even then it's like, okay, can't really do much with it. So it seems like this was kind of introduced to make it, you know, harder for opponents to just play around when being slept, and now it's like, yeah, you can't do anything with the sleep anymore. You maybe get one turn of setup after putting yourself at risk of just tanking a hit to get the spore or doing a 60% accurate move. Then Generation 6, Pokemon sleep counter no longer resets to its original amount when switched out, and also we have it to where grass type Pokemon, they're immune to like spore moves, so that means sleep powder and spore don't work on grass anymore. So it's like massive nerfs to some of the reliable sleep, and then also just sleep in general. And then, you know, it's like, all right, so we don't get to use sleep anymore. All these things are doing is centralizing that we don't have these extra routes that we can take, or you can't splash on any tech. That sure, you can play for like full RNG, 100% cheese, and maybe win some battles, but at the same time, it's nice to have that spare move slot. Like, hey, I could swagger a Pokemon that's using special attacks, and then they hit themselves in confusion. They do a lot of damage, but they can't hit me back with that damage. You know, it's tech. It's being able to have extra options inside the game, but all these changes just make that not possible. And also, I've gone on this rant before, don't get me started, but I got myself started on the Minimize rant. Minimize has been nerfed so hard. So the moves, Body Slam, Dragon Rush, Flying Press, Heat Crash, Phantom Force, Shadow Force, Steamroller, and Stomp bypass, accuracy check, and deal double damage. So it's not like you're safe if you use it. It's the hardest counter out there. Bypasses accuracy check on minimized Pokemon and then deals double damage. That means they're going to get absolutely crushed. This is actually a really nice buff to a lot of moves. Like, we don't see Dragon Rush that often, but then instead of actually playing into the changes, people still complain like, oh, evasion's too strong. And you know, minimized Chansey sets up and I can't do anything about it. It's like, well, then run Dragon Rush. Oh, you don't want to run Dragon Rush because of the accuracy? Then why are you running Stone Edge and Will-O-Wisp and all these other moves? There's so much inconsistency. So all this has done is just make it harder for evasion people to play the game while not giving any of the competitive people satisfaction. Like, this is never enough for them. Generation 7, more nerfs. Heavy Slam bypasses accuracy check and then deals double damage. I mean, the Heavy Slam is on a ton of Pokemon, so I mean, that's going to be one of the more viable minimized counters. And then there was also Smart Strike, which is a really good accuracy bypassing move. And even then, like, all the other accuracy bypassing moves are still really good. And then Z moves now hit through evasion 100% of the time. So because of that, it's like evasion doesn't work, Thunder Wave doesn't work, Prankster doesn't work, Confusion doesn't work. We don't have any of this other stuff, and now crit is just less reliable while making it more lucky to get a crit and then trash your opponent off of that. So, I don't really know what's going on with Pokemon. We're going to see what happens with the 8th generation, but I don't like these changes. I'd like to see a lot of them revert. I think that this was a really good balance to minimize. I would like to see some changes to evasion now that Z moves just make it almost irrelevant. I don't know. Like, I think we need a buff to sleep. We need a buff. We need to get all this hacks back in with Prankster, Thunder Wave, and stuff like that. Like, Prankster thematically makes sense. Like, a Dark-type Pokemon, you can't pull any tricks on a tricky, mischievous Dark-type Pokemon to begin with, but at the same time, it's like, cool, now that they did that, that seems like something that'd be pretty hard to undo. But how do you balance out? So now Prankster has, like, a permanent hard counter. Sheer Cold. Sheer Cold received a nerf as well. It was the only one-hit KO move that could hit everything. Now it can't hit Ice-type Pokemon. If it's not being used by an Ice-type, which actually Suicune, Kyogre, they get Sheer Cold, so now they just... their movesets are being retroactively nerfed just because, like, oh, you could tech it, now you're not allowed to, because the odds go down to almost nothing. So if you guys enjoy the video, just talking about the crit rate and then going on this little bit of ramble about the history of Pokemon nerfs to RNG. And does it matter? Does it do anything? Have you guys noticed the changes? I don't know. So if you guys enjoy the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.